Hi, welcome to the February webinar for our STEM Swivl project. We're so glad that you've joined us this year for the project. I'm Jeanette Jenkins, working with secondary teachers.
And I'm Darren Canet. I'm supporting the elementary side of the project. We wanted to share our learning intentions and success criteria for this webinar with you. So our learning intentions are twofold. We want to make sure that you understand the impact of student-to-teacher feedback and student-to-student feedback. And our other goal is to help you understand the March project assignment. So our success criteria are, you'll know that you're being successful if you're using various strategies that help your students to give you feedback, and you'll also know you're being successful if you're using discussion stems that help your students to give each other feedback. And you'll also know that you're being successful if you're able to use your iPad and Swivl to share, to record and share those two types of feedback.
So our agenda is to review the work that you did last month and then spend some time talking about student-to-teacher feedback and student-to-student feedback, and then we want to make sure that you see our timeline again and you understand the March assignment.
Last month, we really dug into feedback, and we focused really on two areas: learning intentions and success criteria. Learning intentions, letting your students know what the outcome is, and success criteria, let them know if they're being successful or not. And we really focused on the top part of this feedback cycle, teacher to student feedback. Last month, we really drilled down on how to use learning intentions and success criteria to be able to give your students useful feedback on where they are and where they want to go. This month, we want to touch on the other two sections of that feedback cycle: student to teacher feedback and student to student feedback. And maybe surprisingly, of these three types of feedback, the research shows that student-to-teacher feedback is the piece that has the strongest outcome, has the strongest effect on what students learn. All three of these are important, and all three of them need to work together, but student-to-teacher feedback is really where the impact comes. And so that's what we want to start with in just a moment. But we want to keep all of that we want to keep this in mind as we talk about all of that, which is that feedback includes feeding up, which is letting students know where they're going. Those are your learning intentions. Feedback, which is letting students know how they're going, how they're getting there, in other words, where they are right now. And feeding forward, letting students know what their next steps are.
So let's spend a few minutes talking about student-to-teacher feedback and how you can facilitate that in your classroom. The email that had the link to the webinar included some documents for you to have printed out for the members of your team. So make sure that you have those available. And let's begin by looking at page 90, the handout that you have, which says from page 90, Visible Learning Feedback by John Hattie and Shirley Clark. And let's spend just a little bit of time digging into the importance of getting feedback from our students. So let's take 5 minutes for a discussion, and here's how we'll run it. First, each of you silently read the first paragraph under What Matters on page 90, annotating what seems most important to you as you read. So have a highlighter or a pen or pencil and just mark the words, phrases, and ideas that seem most significant to you. Then take a couple of minutes to discuss. What do you think the word synthesized means in the second sentence, and why is synthesis desirable in teaching and learning? And then after you've each spent a couple of minutes going through it, share something you annotated from the paragraph and why you think it is important. So let's take 5 minutes working with that first paragraph from page 90. Okay, I hope you found that paragraph interesting. It shows that there's a lot of feedback available to us coming from our students without even having to say a single without them even having to say a single word to us. And as the next graphic shows, we want communication in our classrooms to be two-way, not just from teacher to student, but we want to be really open to the communication that comes from our students that can help guide our instruction and the learning in our classrooms. The graphic that we showed earlier about the 3 types of feedback, on the student to teacher feedback, it's had a couple of things I thought were interesting. One is that there should be a safe environment for students to share, and that it should lead to very responsive teaching from the teacher. We're always shifting our instruction based on the feedback that we're getting from students, a two-way street. This is a familiar graphic also, and this one, because sometimes we can apply this to our teaching, but let's take a minute and apply it to student feedback. So if you look at the where am I going, the question here we might ask is, are the students aware of where they should be going? Do the students understand the task that has been given to them? And then that's the feed up. If we look at the feed back, how am I going? Are the students understanding their own understanding? And rather than assuming that, how are we getting that information from the students that they are aware of the understanding that they're getting? And then for the feed forward, how is that feedback giving us a way to be responsive in our teaching and to continue that loop of giving feedback as we're receiving it from the students? So one strategy, of course, that we use in order to gauge our students' understanding is questioning. And we know that there definitely are times when we're looking for specific answers, very factual questions and answers. But for this kind of student feedback to teachers, we want to minimize the kinds of questions that are looking for just the right answer, or can the students guess what we're thinking. Instead, we want to look for the kinds of questions that invite students to share their learning and have them think about their learning. What do you mean by this? Can you explain this to me? Show me what you've learned so far. These kinds of open-ended questions where we have a safe environment and students can talk about their thinking and give us real direct feedback. We know that test scores are not always very 100% reflective of the learning that's really happening in a classroom. And also we know secondary teachers have 200 plus students that they're trying to track assessments. If we get students deeply involved in their own thinking about their learning and have them share that with us, it's a profound way for us to really gauge the learning that's happening in the classroom. A couple of other strategies that are mentioned in the Hattie book are eavesdropping and avoiding assumptions. So let's divide that second part of the reading from pages 94 and 95, Invisible Learning Feedback, divide it among the 4 of you. If there are 3 of you, you can look at the 2 pages and you can decide how you want to split that up. The eavesdropping one is quite short. If you have 3 people, maybe the eavesdropping person could also take that first paragraph in avoiding assumptions. But let's do kind of a modified jigsaw. Each of you take a piece of that, give yourselves a few minutes to silently read your portion, then regroup and discuss the readings in order, and then take a couple of minutes and share ideas about how you can incorporate eavesdropping and avoiding assumptions into what you're already doing in your classroom as a way to get better student-to-teacher feedback, which will inform your instruction.
Let's move on and talk about student-to-student feedback. We all know that there's great value in having students lead discussions with their peers about their work, about their thinking. And just to put a slightly finer point on it, here are some ways that student-to-student feedback becomes very valuable. First of all, we've all experienced that when students sit down with another student and start to talk through their writing, or the way they work through a math equation, or the way they drew something out loud with a partner, they almost always immediately see errors and misconceptions and self-correct. That's hugely valuable. We also know that students tend to have more natural conversations when they're leading the discussion, rather than if they're in dialogue with a teacher, or if a teacher is leading a discussion from the front of the room. And so they're better able to ask questions and address misconceptions in real time. We also know that kids and learners in general internalize or make strategies and skills a part of their natural thinking better when they lead the discussion. And for older students especially, quite often they value their peers' feedback over a teacher or older person's feedback. That's part of what kids experience as they go through adolescence. So there's great benefit in facilitating student-to-student feedback. And I want to look at two instances of this: teacher-led student-to-student feedback, and then student-led student-to-feedback. And for this teacher-led student feedback, I want to look at a video called Austin's Butterfly. We're going to take a minute and play this video. It's about 6 minutes long, and it features students at a range of different elementary levels discussing and giving feedback on another student's scientific drawing of a butterfly. You can see the different iterations of that drawing on the screen here. Now, as you're listening to their discussion, I want you to keep something in mind. This discussion that we're going to listen to, in this discussion, students are generating success criteria. They're working through and verbalizing what success criteria looks like, which can be very valuable. There are other instances where you would want to give students success criteria ahead of time to move things more quickly. So keep that in mind as you're listening to this discussion. When do you want to provide students with success criteria ahead of time, and when is it more valuable to have students generate success criteria? So I'm going to go ahead and start this video called Austin's Butterfly.
This is a story called Austin's Butterfly, and it's a true story about a first grade boy, and he goes to school, or used to go to school, in a town called Boise, Idaho. And in his class in Boise, Idaho, they were studying butterflies, and he had to do a project. His job in first grade was to draw a butterfly, and this is the butterfly that he picked. Austin had to use this photograph as his model, and he had to draw an accurate scientific drawing of this butterfly. This is called a tiger swallowtail.
I knew it!
Can you tell, Toby, why it's called tiger?
Because it kind of has the stripes of the tiger right there.
Good. So, here was Austin's job. He was supposed to do a scientific drawing of that butterfly. But remember, Austin was only in first grade. And you know what he did? He forgot to look like a scientist carefully. He got his paper and he just started to draw the image of a butterfly that he had in his head. And he wasn't looking like a scientist, and so this is what he drew. It's not bad, and it is a butterfly, but does it look exactly like this? No, it doesn't yet. It doesn't look exactly like this yet. And so they didn't look at this and say, good, Austin, you're done. They said, Austin, good start. Now we can start giving you critique so you can do a second draft and make it better, and a third draft and make it better, and you can make it much, much closer to this. And he was ready to go. All of the first graders in his critique group sat on the floor like you guys have, and they decided to split their advice into two kinds. First, just the shape of the wings. And then when the shape was right, they'd give him advice about the pattern inside the wings. Alia, what would you say?
You can make it much pointier.
Good. These wings could be much pointier. Who else would add something? Talk, what would you say?
About the angle, because not to be mean about
Yes.
the angle, it's just not exact. So
Okay, so show me. Come on up here, Talk. Show me what you would ask them to do slightly differently.
like to make it a little longer,
Longer where? Draw where you would do it.
right there.
Okay, so pull this out longer.
Yeah.
That's very specific, Talk. Thank you. Jamila, what would you say?
It's like triangle.
Good. Jamila, I love that. So you're saying more like a triangle shape. And I agree. Well, you know what? Those first graders came up with most of those same ideas. And you know what Austin said? He said, okay, I can try. And he went back to his seat and he drew this. Does this look more like a triangle? Yeah. Did he go out further, like a Talk was suggesting?
Yeah.
Did he add some jaggedness here?
Yes.
Like Cindy, did he get rid of that bottom thing?
Yes.
So he did listen to his friends, and he made it better. It's not perfect. Toby, what would you say?
I'd say don't put those little tail things so pointed in. I'd say put them more pointed down.
Good. Okay, Ethan, what would you say?
I think you should make the wings like this, not like just like
Okay, he listened to his friends, and they said, this is really a lot better, Austin. That second draft really is better.
Yeah, maybe you can make a third one.
Good. Maybe he could make a third draft. And so he did this draft.
That's his third draft.
That's his third draft, Heidi. That's just right. Elijah, what do you notice there?
One wing's more pointed than the other, and that side is a little bit hard.
Good. Cover?
Right here, it doesn't have the inside thing still.
Okay. Needs a little bit more of that notch. So, do you think maybe he should do a fourth draft?
Yeah.
Well, that's just what he said. He said, shoot, okay, I got round again. I'll go back and do a fourth draft. He listened. Does it look more even like Elijah was suggesting?
Yes.
Yeah, and does it look like it's coming out a little sharper, like Cindy was suggesting? And like Attack was saying, it's a little, the angle looks a little better. So now Austin was feeling really good. He said, am I ready to add some pattern? And they said, okay, why don't you try adding some of the pattern? And he did.
Oh, he's good at it. He is so good.
And then they said, Austin, you're ready for color. Let's look at his last draft. And what do you think? Did it come out really good?
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think about how much progress he made? Attack, what would you say about his progress?
He made like a lot of progress. He persevered doing it. His friends were honest with him.
What was it about the kinds of advice that they gave that allowed him to get better each time? Hassan?
Well, they told him what was wrong about it.
Did they say it's just wrong, or were they more specific?
They were more specific, but they weren't mean about it.
Right. Hadley.
6 drafts.
And so is that something that other kids should learn from? What should we learn from that?
We can make other drafts if it's not right.
Good. So if it's not right, you can keep doing more drafts to make it better.
And you just don't use things in your head. You want to use sharp eye.
Good. He used the eyes of a scientist. Right.
So, we're going to ask you to take 5 minutes and have a discussion after seeing that powerful video. First of all, spend a couple minutes talking about the teacher's prompts and success criteria. What's the value of this kind of feedback that those students gave, that really specific feedback versus general feedback? And then reflect as a team about how you can be more effective in helping students to use success criteria to give each other specific feedback. And then talk about what are some challenges that you face in doing that and how can you address them. So take 5 minutes. Okay, so a powerful video, not only because the students are giving effective, specific feedback, but also because they're reflecting on what the value of that effective, specific feedback is. But here's the thing, ultimately, that's a very teacher-driven and teacher-directed activity that those students participated in. And we know that we need to start with the I do, but we need to move students to the we do and ultimately to the you do. And so in the long term, we want to empower students to be able to hold and drive those discussions themselves. The question is, how do you do that effectively? I don't know about you all, but when I was a new teacher, I knew that I needed to engage my students in those sorts of discussions and conversations. But when I would just throw students into that situation, quite often the value of the discussion and conversation was not really high. And I realized pretty quickly that I needed to teach my students how to have those kinds of conversations. No matter the age group of the students that you teach, when they're discussing complex material, complex skills and strategies, we need to give them supports to help them have those sorts of conversations. And one of the most valuable ways to do this, and one that John Hattie actually recommends, is giving students conversation or discussion stems that give them the language and the direction to point them towards what's valuable in discussing. Now, this document was emailed to you along with a link to this webinar, and so hopefully you all either have a paper copy of this or an electronic copy that you can look at, because it's a little small here on the screen. But what I love about these stems is that it divides this language into different situations when you'd want to use them. For example, in the upper left corner you have admiration stems, ways to point out what seems to be really effective in the student's thinking or the product that you're looking at. Next to that, you have questions that you can use to get the student to dig in a little bit more deeply or clarify misunderstandings. Next, we have inspiration. If a student wants to share an idea with another student, this is language that makes it possible to do so in a respectful way. Next to that is perspiration, and I love this one. These are prompts that push, that help a student to push his or her peer to think a little bit more deeply, and to go back and reflect, and try again in a very respectful way. Down at the bottom here we have clarifications, so ways to kind of wrap things up and make sure that everyone has an understanding of what was discussed. And there's a space here for class creation, so that together as a class you can come up with other stems that might be useful. So here's what I would like you to do. Again, take 5 minutes, and if you haven't done so already, make sure that all of you have read through those stems. And then we've got 3 prompts here for you to discuss. How do these or other stems that you might use help students share effective feedback? Second, what stems or other supports do you already provide for your students? And then 3, are these that I provided with you appropriate for your grade level or age group? What changes might you need, or what other tools what other stems could you use? So go ahead and take 5 minutes to discuss. All right, hopefully you had a great discussion. And if you just struck gold, you can go ahead and hit pause and finish your discussion. But we're going to wrap up this section on student-to-student feedback. So let's talk about the March assignment. You'll watch this video at some point in February, and then the following month in March, we're going to ask you to do something similar to the last assignment. We'll give you two options. First of all, you can record student-to-teacher feedback as a part of your instruction, or the other option is to record student-to-student feedback as a part of your instruction. Then take that video, upload it to Midas to share with your team, watch your teammates' videos, annotate them, and then come together and discuss. The real value, well, there's value in watching yourself, there's value in watching your peers, and then there's also value in discussing with your peers what works and what doesn't work so well. And just to give you some perspective, here's where we are in the project. February and March, we have the cycle of the webinar and the assignment. In April and May, we will repeat this cycle with a slight difference. You'll actually be using the video that you record to earn a digital badge. And with that, we're going to sign off. Thanks.
Thank you. And a big shout out to Matt Harris at Farmington High, who's helping with the secondary project. He's doing a great job. We appreciate him.
Thank you.